Beneath the streets of Liverpool right now, there are chambers so large they take your breath away. Jan rooms the height of a 4-story building, passages that go nowhere, vaults that nobody mapped, and a mystery that 2 centuries of historians have failed to solve. And the strangest part? Most of what you're about to hear wasn't even discovered until people alive today were already walking around. These are the Williamson Tunnels, Jan, a series of extensive subterranean excavations in the Edge Hill area of Liverpool, thought to have been created under the direction of a tobacco merchant named Joseph Williamson between 1810 and 1840 century. The popular version of the story is that they're an unsolvable labyrinth built by a madman with no explanation. But the real story is stranger than that, because some of these facts are ones that even dedicated visitors to the site don't know. And one of them, Jen, we'll get to it near the end, Jen changes the entire way you understand what is down there. There are 10 things about these structures that most people have never heard. We're going to go through all of them. And by the end, you'll understand why this isn't just a quirky local mystery. It is one of the most genuinely unexplained situations in British history, sitting right underneath a city of 500,000 people. Let's start with number 10. More than 57,000 properties is Baffingershire of Liverpool's total housing stock. Jan sit within areas at potential risk of subsidence from historic non-Jen coal mining activity, and the Williamson network is part of that. So when people talk about these tunnels as a historical curiosity, something you visit on a Saturday afternoon, they're missing the fact that the tunnels are simultaneously an active concern for property insurers and homeowners right now in Arshilil. For those properties underlain by the recorded extent of the Williamson tunnels or considered to lie within their potential zone of influence, there is a real element of risk. The ground beneath a significant chunk of this city is essentially hollow, and nobody has a complete picture of how far it goes. That is not history. That is a live situation. Number 9. The tunnels have served as a backdrop for a Doctor Who episode on the BBC, which means that at some point, people watching a primetime science fiction show were looking at a real, genuinely unexplained Liverpool location dressed up as an alien world Zan and had absolutely no idea. There is something quietly remarkable about that. A place that no one can fully explain being used to represent something fictional because the real thing already looks impossible enough. Number 8. The Friends of Williamson's Tunnels is a registered charity run by volunteer miners engaged in the exploration, excavation and conservation of the tunnels, and they receive no government funding. One of Liverpool's strangest and most genuinely significant historical sites survives entirely because a group of unpaid enthusiasts decided it was worth their time. Not the city, not the state, just people who cared enough to keep digging. That is worth sitting with for a moment because it also means the pace of discovery is entirely dependent on how many volunteers show up on a given weekend. Number 7. Here is where things start to get a bit more unsettling. Some believe Williamson was driven by religious passion, preparing for a coming apocalypse. The apocalypse theory, it sounds like something someone invented to make a podcast more interesting, but it was actually raised by Williamson's own contemporaries. Some have asserted he could have secretly belonged to a millenarian sect, while choosing to keep that hidden to protect his reputation as a hard, Dan-headed businessman. Or he may have simply believed that the end times might come soon, and that it made sense to be cautious. Either way, Williamson may have been attempting to create an underground safe haven where friends, family, and fellow believers could wait out catastrophe. Now, the staff at the Heritage Centre are fairly blunt about this one, and they call it total guff. But the fact that it keeps resurfacing, that it was raised in his own lifetime, and that nobody can definitively disprove it, tells you something about how little we actually know about what was going on in this man's head. And that brings us to number 6, which is the thing that should bother you more than the apocalypse theory. Williamson kept no records of the construction or purpose of the tunnels. None. He was never forthcoming about the reasons why he built them. He left no diaries or written correspondence explaining himself, and his final will and testament contained no instructions for how the tunnels might be used. So there is no map, and there never was one. The people clearing rubble today are discovering the layout of this network for the very first time. Centuries after it was built, every section they open is a first. Every chamber they find is a room no living person has ever stood in. Think about what that actually means. They're not restoring something, they're discovering it. We're halfway through, and I want to remind you that the one thing that reframes everything else, the thing that changes the entire premise of this story, is coming up in the last few points. Keep watching. Number 5. Nearly all knowledge of the tunnels, and of Williamson's life in general, was derived from the 1845 account of James Stonehouse. Although not published at the time it was written, it was finally reprinted in full by Charles Hand as part of a 1916 article, Joseph Williamson, the King of Edge Hill. So our entire understanding of this man, his intentions, his personality, his eccentricities, all of it flows from one second-hand manuscript that sat unpublished for 70 years and was then reprinted once in a niche historical journal. That is the foundation. One document, one observer. And everything built on top of that is interpretation. Number 4. After being gradually infilled with rubble and spoil during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the tunnels remained largely inaccessible until archaeological investigations were carried out in 1995. Since then, volunteers have rediscovered and excavated an extensive network of tunnels, chambers, and voids across several sites. So when you walk through the parts that are open to the public today, you are walking through spaces that have only existed in living memory for about 30 years. The ancient mystery has a very modern discovery date. Most of what tourists see was inaccessible within the lifetime of people who are still alive right now. Number 3. Among the discoveries is a huge chamber nicknamed the Banqueting Hall, which measures some 64 feet long, 14 feet wide, and 27 feet high. It starts some 23 feet below ground level and descends to a total depth of 60 feet. That is not a tunnel. That is a room the size of a small cathedral buried under a residential street that sat completely unknown until volunteers started digging. And the Paddington site, the one open to general visitors, wasn't fully cleared of debris until 2016. Part of this ancient mystery was still an active excavation site within the last decade. These are architectural works that had not been seen by human eyes in more than 150 years. Number 2, and this is the one that the casual coverage almost always skips. If you've ever been down there, you'll know this immediately. The tunnels hold a remarkably stable temperature year-round, around 18 degrees Celsius, regardless of what is happening above ground. Summer, winter, it doesn't matter. The temperature barely shifts. That is not just an atmospheric detail for tour guides to mention. It is a clue. It tells you how deep this network actually goes, how geologically insulated it is from the surface. These aren't shallow cellars. They're cut into sandstone bedrock at serious depth, and the earth itself is holding them at a constant temperature like a sealed room. That detail alone should tell you that whatever was built down here, it was built to last. And now, number 1. The thing I mentioned at the start, the one that changes everything, although popularly described as tunnels. The majority of the structures actually comprise brick or stone vaulting over excavations in the underlying sandstone. The purpose of the works remains unclear and remains a subject of heavy speculation. But here is what the academic research is starting to suggest. A 2014 geological paper proposes the tunnels are byproducts of slot quarrying, that Williamson was following the best seam of new red sandstone for building material, quietly understating his extraction to avoid mineral rights duties. Academics at Edge Hill University concluded the excavations were the result of work following the best seam of sandstone rather than any planned route, which means the mysterious labyrinth narrative, the one that fills the brochures and the documentaries, may actually be a misunderstood industrial byproduct, not a grand design, not an apocalypse shelter, not a philanthropic monument. Just a man following a seam of good stone through a hillside, leaving vaulted voids behind him, and never bothering to explain it because to him, there was nothing to explain. That is the open question that nobody has resolved. Because if that is true, then the mystery isn't really about the tunnels at all. It is about us, about why we need there to be a mystery in the first place. By his death in 1840, Joseph Williamson had honeycombed a hillside in Edge Hill with brick, vaulted passages, chambers 3 stories underground, and spaces large enough to echo a voice 7 times. His neighbors called him the Mole of Edge Hill. No one has fully solved why he did it. And here is what changed from the beginning of this video. You came in thinking this was a story about unexplained structures, and it is. But it is also a story about what happens when one man keeps a secret, leaves no records, and dies without a word of explanation. Everything else, the apocalypse theories, the charity narratives, the quarrying papers, is us trying to fill that silence. Every meter unearthed raises new questions rather than answering them. And the volunteers are still down there right now digging. If this kind of hidden history is your thing, places that sit right underneath ordinary life and refuse to make sense, drop a comment with where you think Williamson's real motivation was. The apocalypse theory, the quarrying explanation, the charity story, I genuinely want to know which one you find most convincing, because the comment section on this one is always more interesting than the video. Subscribe if you haven't already.